Dracarys. Welcome to episode 40 of The Bandwagon Fan. This is the show where we talk all things pop culture and what we're into right now. I'm Josh.
I'm Katé.
And I'm embarrassed. Just kidding. I'm AJ.
Hey, I know that's what your parents called you, but we don't need that kind of negativity on the show.
All right.
Because our show hit its 40th episode today, which means we're ready for a midlife crisis.
I'm a lot
ready.
of cringe.
I'm gonna buy a Tesla, make some dad jokes.
And a grill.
I'm ready. And a grill.
Yeah.
Hell yeah. Yeah. Blackstone.
And white chunky sneakers.
White chunky sneakers. We're describing middle America. This is
yes.
Jorts.
Yeah.
Is this an AI construction of middle America?
Yeah,
no, but speaking of AI.
Sim.
Oh yeah, I love Sims. No, speaking of AI though, as our icebreaker today, I wanted to know if you guys were familiar with a little phenomena that happened over the past couple of weeks. Are you guys familiar with like AI artists at all?
So funny thing, Katé, I was telling AJ because he showed me what this was, and I was at the gym this morning and I saw somebody across the gym on like a treadmill or something watching the news, and I saw this weird image of some kind of character. And it was apparently something called FN Mecha.
Yeah. So just to give like a quick backstory, right? Like digital artists are not new, right? Infamously, I think the Gorillas are probably the most, they're the most notorious digital group, right? So this isn't a new concept. But as of the last maybe, 5-6 years, you have seen like more attempts to make these like AI influencers, these like literal computer generated influencers and stuff like that. The idea
bigger in Asia than it is in the States right now.
Yeah.
Yep.
And
very big
the
in
idea,
Korea.
Very big overseas. And the idea is basically like they don't have to pay, royalties to something they create. It's having complete autonomy over whatever image that they're creating. And so someone, I don't know the actual group that created this, but someone made this digital AI rapper called FN Mecha, a robot rapper. And in and of itself, I think it's pretty harmless. Capital Music Group, Capitol Records, one of the biggest record labels in the country, they signed this digital artist because I think they were, toying with the idea because, someone was going to sell some songs that come with NFTs. That's what everyone's trying to get into. But I think the bigger issue is that FN Mecha is like this weird amalgam of like Black culture. And it's, it feels kind of gross. Like it's like, oh, you made like digital blackface. Like that's kind of what it is. It's like, this isn't a Black person voicing it. Black people didn't really have like it wasn't created by like a Black artist.
There was no Black people involved.
No Black people involved in this process. So I know some people may hear that, they may roll their eyes. And like I can understand if you don't understand. But for somebody who is Black, that's just weird. You know what I mean? It's just a little weird I guess the only way to describe it would be like someone having a birthday party for you and inviting all your friends and family, but you're not invited. And then you see pictures on Instagram of people celebrating your party. You're like, wow, that must have been a good time. I wish I was involved. It's just a little weird thing to see, but at the same time, it's not really surprising. What are your thoughts?
I've heard, I haven't heard anyone compare these things yet, but maybe it's in the comments already. But there's that issue of a lot of cultural, like fashion statements that originated in Black communities that then white people are taking and being like, oh, I made this like new look. Like a while ago, I know there was like backlash regarding like the fresh face look, which was having like sleeked back hair, big hoop earrings, and having like a fresh face of makeup. But like that look originated a lot in like Latino community and like the Black community. And then I know that recently there was another issue too, where some of these like size 00 white skinny models were wearing like basketball shorts and kind of wearing them like sagging kind of.
Mm.
and being like, look at this like new trend we're like creating. And everyone was like, this is a trend that has had
Forever.
it's had negative associations to Black people, like, oh, saggy basketball shorts, or like the look earlier, the fresh face of like sleek back, like natural hair with hoop earrings. It's like these looks that then people are taking and making money, and they're profiting off of like Black looks. And I feel like this is exactly that. Like they're literally profiting. They're trying to profit off of
Trying to profit off
like Black style, a Black skin who's not even a real person.
Black person. Yeah, no, it's very emblematic.
It's nothing new.
It's nothing new. It's very emblematic of the late Paul Mooney's most infamous quote. I'll use the PG version, but everyone wants to be a Black person, but no one wants to be a Black person. That's essentially what this is emblematic of. So really because of the backlash, yeah, it is. Rest in peace, Paul Mooney. But because of the backlash, Capitol Records immediately was like, okay, we're dropping this artist. They didn't want the smoke. I think somebody kind of looked around. They're like, yeah, this probably wasn't the best way to do it. Not saying the idea is bad. Just, workshop it. That's all I'm trying to say. Just, workshop it. Just, it almost reminds me of like when Gap like made that ad and they had like this, like a Black kid wearing like, oh, I'm a monkey type of shirt that, just somebody needs to be in the room to say, hey guys, that kind of thing. But I just thought you guys would think that'd be interesting. So that's what happened this week.
You know what? Yeah, that's not an uncommon occurrence where someone big with a lot of money to throw around doesn't have somebody else in the room to be like, hey, this sucks. And another prime example would be HBO. I mean, let's talk about the very dead, rotted, bloated elephant in the room. Game of Thrones.
George R. R. Martin? Oh, sorry. Yeah. It's a low blow. I'm just playing.
It was. Hey, man.
Jamie's
going to put that out later.
He just needs to finish those books, and everyone will leave him alone.
He does. Anyways, we're not going to be around the bush. Game of Thrones, the TV show, ended horribly, and a lot of people felt pretty burnt by it, myself included. I don't know about you guys. Like, what's your I've read the books, I binged the books, still waiting for the series to finish. I binged most of the TV show and caught up for the last couple seasons. So what are your guys' like experience or level of fandom with Game of Thrones?
I mean, I tried reading the first book, I think, the first in the series. I'm a little confused on how many there are and whatnot, but I know that wherever the show Game of Thrones started, whichever book mirrors that, I started that book, didn't finish it. I was like, this is too much for me. The show came out around the time I was a freshman in college, and I went to a private Christian school, and I was like, this is too much sex and violence. This is not what God wants for me. I literally, I got invited to watch an episode with some friends one night, and the next day I went to church, and the pastor had a whole sermon about keeping your eyes pure. And I was like,
you were sweating.
I was like, well, this is a sign. I need to keep my mind and fire. I was like, my eyes need to be pure. My mind needs to be pure. This is not gonna do it for me, this show.
God,
so I didn't watch it. So, what happened to me was I caved hard, and probably around in the second to last season, I think, it was just there was so much hype. I had my main friend group all would watch it together. I was the one person missing from the friend group who didn't watch it. And I finally was just I'm watching it. And I binge watched it over a summer. I caught up. And then the last season, every week I got to go to the watch parties, and we'd do potluck style and the food and all that stuff. And it was such a great show. And then the last season, I really think it's one of the worst letdowns in history because of just the amount of loose ends and the horrible way that they ended all the different characters' storylines.
Yeah, I think it's really crazy when you take a step back and you think about it. But Game of Thrones, even with the last season, is still one of the greatest TV shows ever made. I think in the moment when you watch the last season, you're like, wow, this is really disappointing. But it's only because there was so much time between each season, especially the last two seasons. and it was just like the ultimate like tease. You know, it was just like we were teased some ending, some great ending. So I think the ending of Game of Thrones is more emblematic of our expectation for the way it should have ended. But I don't necessarily think it was horrible. I just think it was rushed. But that's really about it. I think the showrunners, I can't remember the name, DB and I think Benioff. They wanted to be done with this franchise. It was rumored that it was supposed to go to 10 seasons, so you can see where they took some shortcuts, and you know that's the result. It just nothing felt earned in that last season, and so I don't hate where it was going. I don't hate the direction it took per se. I just think a lot of shortcuts. My favorite example of this before we like transition to the new show, like, you know, the show spent 7 seasons explaining to us that the spider is that guy, right? Like he is literally working in the shadows all the time, and you don't really know his influence on things until after it happens.
The spider?
Season 8,
Littlefinger?
No. This I can't remember his name. The bald dude. The spider. Yeah, I mean, he's the bald guy. The guy. He's the spider.
Oh,
I mean,
the man
yeah.
in the tree.
The eunuch.
No, the eunuch.
The eunuch.
Oh my god! Yes.
Started with the V, I think.
Wow.
Why can't I think of his name?
Viserys?
Yeah, okay.
No,
Viserys is a Targaryen.
Oh my god! What was his name?
Regardless of his name, right? The point I'm making is that like throughout the show, there are so many events that happen in the background. Thank you, Varys. Thank you. There's so many events that happen in the background. And, you know, a lot of the things you don't see is handed until way later. You know what I mean? And in season 8, he's really walking around and be like, John, we got to kill the queen. John, come here. We got to kill her. Like in broad daylight. And it's just like, okay, this is, you know, they're trying to expedite a process. So,
and then the whole the Azor Ahai thing, and it turns out to be Arya with zero reasoning for that.
Or even the fact that Bran, you know, and by the way, if we didn't like say that by now, there's going to be spoilers in this episode. But I mean, the fact that Bran became king, it didn't feel earned. It was, I mean, it made sense. It's just like, no, I think it made sense because he has nothing to want. You know what I mean? So like, I get it. You know,
yeah, it actually makes perfect sense. But it doesn't fit the show.
Doesn't fit the show. It doesn't fit the show. It doesn't fit the build up. And so
in the real world, that's what would happen.
Yeah. So that last season felt really, really rough. And I think that's why a lot of people were pretty apprehensive for HBO's new show. You know what I mean?
Right. Including myself. I mean, even our last episode, I was just like, oh yeah, House of the Dragon. So exciting. I honestly probably would not have watched this show if not for the podcast. So all you people who listen, thank you for your love.
For me as well. I don't think I'd watch this without knowing that I want to do a review on it. Otherwise, I'm not sure if I would take the time, because I do feel like this is going to end up being a time commitment, a big one.
Agreed. And that's, I think that, I don't think that what we're trying to do is like for those of you out there who watch Game of Thrones, who loved it, you know, who were at the watch parties, dressed up, bought all the merch. Like, we're here to be like, hey, here's what to expect for this show. We'll let you know, if you want to check this out.
Do people dress up to watch Game of Thrones or House of Dragon?
I would not be surprised if Harry Potter fans collect every year and meet at that train station. I got an email saying that they expect you to dress up. So yeah, I can totally see.
There's a bar in Chicago that does these pop-ups. Allegedly they're illegal, and they'll keep the pop-up open until they allegedly receive a cease and desist letter.
Like, and hypothetically, that's their business model. Just putting it out there.
Allegedly that is like part of their business model. And they did a Game of Thrones one, and I went to it, and it was so cool. So cool. I sat in an Iron Throne. I have a picture in the Iron Throne.
Oh, yeah. I forgot about that.
Anyways, House of the Dragon, it's a new era for Game of Thrones. So if you've never even watched Game of Thrones, you don't really have to, because this is a prequel show. This takes place like over 100 years before Game of Thrones. So like you don't have to have watched any of it before. George R.R. Martin signed off on this show. Like, he was pretty involved in it. He said he's feeling good about it. HBO spent $200 million on this season on 10 episodes. So there's a big investment here.
It's the cash cow. It's the cash cow.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that brings us to House of the Dragon, episode 1, released last week. And yeah, we're here to tell you all what we thought about it and break it down.
Yeah, I mean, to start off, I think this takes place just to give like a really, really broad overview, because we're not trying to sit here for 7 hours. But, if you've never watched Game of Thrones before, first of all, why are you listening to this episode? No, I'm just kidding.
Welcome, though.
Welcome. But basically, this is taking place in the reign of the Targaryens, right? So when you watch Game of Thrones, the whole thing is you're kind of watching the rebirth of the Targaryens, or the Targaryen dynasty in some way, because something I like about this show is that they allude to this very fact that the Targaryens' power rises and falls with dragons, right? So like they are the only people, for whatever reason, and I'm hoping we get to understand why in this show, but for whatever reason they are able to commune with dragons. It's like part of their bloodline, that they can communicate with dragons. And another distinction that this show also made is that they don't control the dragons, which I think is something that wasn't necessarily explained in Game of Thrones. Not that I would know, but it just was never explained. It's kind of like a mutual partnership, if that makes any sense. And they also kind of they kind of allude to the fact that, at least in this first episode, that it's not on the humans' conditions, if that makes any sense. Like, it's not up to the humans whether the dragons stay. It's not up to the humans whether the dragons work with them. And I think what this show is really gonna like dig into is why the dragons disappear in the first place. That's what I think, because we'll get into it later. But that's my theory. That's what I think the show is, because they kind of make that, they kind of tell you that, like, there's something that I guess humans have to upkeep, that if they don't, the dragons will peace out, and we see the effects of that in the actual Game of Thrones show.
But that's the thing in the Game of Thrones show. I don't really get the vibe that they necessarily peace out. I feel like they were almost killed off or died off, like maybe a mix.
That's part of it, but also the dragons got smaller and smaller over time.
Right,
so like
exactly.
Something was not going right. And
like nitrates in their food.
Yeah, right. A lot of dragons were like being like stillborn, like stuff was happening.
Radiation, GMOs.
It's like Tinkerbell. They didn't believe, Yeah.
All right. So for the casuals and for people unaware, the Targaryen history in 60 seconds. AJ, time me. So the Targaryens were one of many dragon lords in this place called Valyria. It's like this really powerful kingdom, and they weren't a big deal there, but Valyria is gonna go up in smoke. There is a Targaryen girl who has this dream about it. So the Targaryens are like, all right, we're out. So they go to the edge of Valyria, and guess what? Valyria goes up in smoke. So a little bit after that, there is a Targaryen named Aegon, who becomes known as Aegon the Conqueror. Also has a dream. Targaryens have lots of dreams, and he decides to go to Westeros to conquer. And he sets up this dynasty, and that brings us to where House of the Dragon is taking place. It's kind of nearing the end. It's the beginning of the end of the Targaryen.
The beginning of the end, yes.
And that brings us to episode 1 and the prologue. Did you guys understand like what exactly, like who was doing what? Because there's a lot of names being thrown out there.
Yeah, and I'm sorry ahead of time for anyone listening. We're not George R.R. Martin. We don't sit here and come up with these different names. So if you're confused, highly recommend to watch the show with subtitles. It does help. So,
amen.
Yeah.
So to start out,
go ahead.
I'll just say the prologue. Viserys, he's one of the main characters. He's the king. He's named the heir of the current king, Jaehaerys, who is dying. And Jaehaerys had, I believe it was 13 children, and basically they have all died off, and all he's got left right now are 2 grandchildren. Viserys, his eldest male heir, and Rhaenyra, which I don't know how to say the name, is technically the oldest of his grandchildren.
I think it was his daughter. I thought.
Was it his daughter?
He's talking about
The queen who never was.
Yeah, she was. I thought that was his daughter. It was like his daughter versus his nephew. I thought.
No, they're both. Well, technically, they're both his grandchildren.
Okay.
Also, what's weird, and FYI, like if you're squeamish and weirded out by stuff, people, lots of incest. Oh, yeah. Jaehaerys was married to his sister. Yes. Several of his children married their siblings. Viserys' parents were siblings. Rhaenyra, her parents actually weren't siblings, so there was no incest on that side. But got to keep the bloodline pure.
Got to keep the bloodline pure, and I also think that speaks to why so many of them, why it's hard for them to reproduce as a family. I think that's one of the other things too, that there's so much incest that there's so much incest that literally you're breeding like unhealthy humans. You know what I mean? So I think it's very emblematic, right? It's the trade-off, right? With great power comes, it's like, or excuse me, the monkey paw, right? They have this great power in the dragons, but the downside is they have no lineage to carry it on. So yeah.
And then we fast forward. There's lots of time jumps here. We fast forward about 9 years, and now Viserys is in the same position. He does not have a male heir. He only has a daughter. I can't remember. How do you say her name? Rhaenyra.
We should just call her Ray. I think it's just
Ray.
Easy, man.
Ray.
Yeah.
Who has? Did she remind you of anybody from Game of Thrones?
I mean, she reminded me of Daenerys for sure.
Yeah, I mean,
with her demeanor, her queenly demeanor. You know what I mean?
To me, like Daenerys.
Lead. Yeah.
And a lot like Arya. Like she even low key kind of quotes Arya and saying I don't want to be a wife and a mother. Like I want to be a warrior. I want to be an explorer. And then that also is a nod to a princess who kind of established Dorne and the whole Martell dynasty, Princess Nymeria, who was also the name of Arya's direwolf. There's a lot of the strong female iconography, I guess, or whatever you want to call it, which I love it. I think it's really cool. But yeah, so Viserys doesn't have an heir. The closest thing he has is his brother, Prince Daemon, whose name looks a lot like the way demon used to be spelled. Just saying.
Just throwing it out there.
Who's played by Matt Smith.
Doctor Who.
Ugh.
Yeah.
I did not like seeing him in this. I like
really?
that. Well, yeah, because I like with Game of Thrones and this show, they mostly cast people who are not famous in the mainstream. Almost every actor before Game of Thrones came out, never heard of anybody in Game of Thrones. Before the show came out, never heard of anybody in the show. Matt Smith, though, all I see is Doctor Who's face when he is doing all the stuff that he did in this first episode. All I'm thinking is, why, Doctor Who? Please stop! Please stop.
That I will say, feels intentional.
I was going to say the same thing. I think that's supposed to be for the fact that his character is frustratingly charismatic, right?
Yeah,
so it's
he's the new Jamie.
You don't. But so here's the thing: Jamie always had a sweet side to him. I don't think Daemon does. You know what I'm saying? Daemon, I don't think we're going to see a redemption arc with Daemon. I think
he is a Targaryen, though.
Yeah, Daemon is always going to be a prick, and I think that's his thing. Like Jaime wasn't really a prick, you know what I mean? And once you got to know him, you're like you hate to like him. I think Daemon is a little bit of the opposite. Like you like him, but you don't feel comfortable liking him, if that makes any sense. And I think
you're right. George R. R. Martin, in a different writing, describes Daemon as somebody who was both loved so much, but also hated.
Right.
But also idolized, but also despised. This weird, kind of a lot like Jamie is what I'm trying to say. Where it's this character where you're I hate you, but I like you, but you're really competent, but you're awful. It's great characterization.
Yeah. And the other thing too, I think is so important is that I think when you look at everything from Jaime's perspective, it's very relatable, right? Jaime's always trying to protect his family. Here, I feel like Daemon's character was cool because Daemon's about Daemon.
100%.
He's about Daemon. He's
the little brother that wants his big brother's toy.
Yeah. And he's like, hey man, if you're not gonna share, I'm gonna get my own toys. You know?
Yeah. And he does that. He takes over the Kingsguard. He's the reason the Kingsguard have the gold cloaks now, in Game of Thrones, we might say now. But yeah, it's not a good time, man. And this is very much like medieval era. And dude, the past was the worst. Like, Ray's mom's like, hey, you can't be a warrior. Our battlefield's the bed, the birthing bed. And man, does that come to pass?
Yeah. She's like Josh said, Viserys is really wanting a male heir because that's important for some reason, and you come to find out that his wife has tried many times and has had many stillbirths, miscarriages, and stuff like that, and she's kind of like, bro, I gotta be honest with you, whatever happens with this baby, I'm tapped out. Like I cannot go through this anymore. And during this episode is set essentially during the birth, right? The king has had a vision, and I think this is going to be important for the rest of the show, but the king has had a vision that a Targaryen sits on the throne or something like that, and so he's convinced that this baby not only will live but will be a male. He's convinced of this, so he throws this party, essentially like a pre-coronation type of event. And at this pre-coronation, I think there's a lot that before we get to like the latter half of the episode, I think there's a lot that they're setting up in this pre-coronation party where they have the jousting event, and we get to see some main characters, kind of do their thing. There is Otto. Otto is the king's hand, or the right hand. Yeah.
King's hand, yeah.
But he's got Littlefinger written all over his forehead. All right.
Yes.
For those who may not know, Littlefinger is a conniving SOB in Game of Thrones who is always
so entertaining, though.
Yeah, entertaining, but always trying to rise above his station. You know what I mean?
I like Otto better. Already, I like Otto better than Littlefinger, though. Even though he kind of tries to pimp out his daughter at one point, which
he definitely
was so uncomfortable.
Yeah, he definitely pimped out his daughter.
Even if he does that later, I still think he's already better because of his thoughts on Daemon I do think he wants what's best for the realm. I do think. And himself, best for himself.
Okay, so the reason why I don't know, I think you're half right. I think he wants what's best for the realm. I think he doesn't like Daemon because Daemon doesn't trust him, and he knows that. And it's one of those things where it's like, hey, look, you're a con man, I'm a con man. Don't mess up my con. And I think that's why he's so hell-bent on getting rid of, I think he legitimately thought if he gave Daemon enough boring things, he would just go away. Because we learned that Daemon is married to the current queen of the Vale. So it's like, you shouldn't even be here. You should be away. And I think he kind of hoped that if he just gave him enough dumb jobs, master of the coin, master of the whatever, like the dumb jobs, that he would just leave, and he didn't. In fact, he turned the Kingsguard into like a small militia. And so I think that's why Otto doesn't like him, and why he's always in the king's ear to tell him, hey, you know what? We got to get rid of him. You know what I mean? Because Otto was the first one to say Daemon cannot be king, or Daemon cannot be heir. You know what I mean? So I think that's his motive. His motive is to rise above his station. And I think very similar to Tyrion Lannister, he will find the opportunity to usurp Viserys. I think that's what's going to happen. You know what I mean? Yeah.
You think Daemon will or Otto?
No, Otto. Well, both of them. But specifically, I think Otto is there to undermine the king. I think you're right, though. Like, he's doing it for the benefit of the realm. But I think Daemon voiced the same thing that Otto did in the argument that Daemon and Viserys had, right? Viserys kind of tells Daemon, and we'll talk about this later, he tells him, like, hey man, you're out of line. I don't know what to do with you. And he's like, look, Daemon's basically telling his brother, like, I'm trying to protect you because you're not strong enough to do this job. So I think that a lot of that's going to come back to play later, Yeah, I mean, after the coronation, we do meet another character from Dorne. If you guys remember that guy.
Christian.
Yeah. I think he's going to be a good character because he seems like the only person who can actually fight Daemon.
And is honorable.
Yeah, very honorable.
Even after he shows mercy and Daemon tries to stab him, he still lets him go.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, he lets him go.
which means either he's going to be the Jon Snow or he's going to be the Ned Stark. There's only two ways that works.
I think it's going to be a Ned Stark situation because I think we know what happens in Game of Thrones. If you're too nice, you get the knife. Okay,
but he's young. He's young, and there's a lot of young women in the show who need a love interest. So I feel like he's going to be stuck around as a love interest. I don't know.
I think so too. But the only other thing, we don't know his. You know? We kind of know we don't know where his family ends up, right? So I think that's another hint that like. I don't know if Homeboy makes it. You know, that's all I'm trying to say because we never heard of this family. You know what I mean? So I don't know if he makes it or maybe I don't know. There's nowhere you go in Westeros where you just kind of disappear as a house unless you get absorbed.
Night's Watch.
Yeah, well, that's the other thing too. We don't even. And this is the Night Watch even there? Is that?
No, I'm pretty sure it is.
Is it okay?
Yeah, but.
I don't know.
I'm almost positive it is, and I'm pretty sure at this point in time it's actually pretty powerful. Because in Game of Thrones, it's like disheveled. None of the forts are manned anymore.
That's a good point.
Whereas a long time ago, like it was a pretty formidable force. I don't know.
I'm gonna wait to see to believe it, but
yeah.
I'll bring us back to the plot to finish it up. Let's see.
You know what they didn't make us wait to see? Hollywood loves to show birthing scenes. This one had quite the twist, and it was very uncomfortable to watch.
Yes,
it was a forced cesarean. That was pretty gruesome.
Force is the key word. Where it's like, dude, like your wife and child are gonna die. At least talk to your wife about this.
Well, he doesn't know the child's gonna die, though. That's the thing.
No, but the maester tells him you're gonna lose both unless we do this operation. It's like okay. Like talk to your wife about this. You guys are married. Like communication's pretty important.
Yeah,
that's just my thought. I don't know.
I mean, that's important nowadays, but I feel like you have to watch this in the context of the time. This is supposed to be like a medieval world back then. I mean, earlier you guys were talking about like, well, like we need a male heir. Why? And I'm like, even me as a woman, I'm like, yeah, of course it's stupid to us in the 21st century, but it's like back then they even say it's like it's not traditional. And I think also they know that it's like, how are we going to get an entire kingdom to respect a female ruler in a very, very patriarchal, misogynistic, sexist society and world? And I mean, so it also makes sense too. It's like if the whole world revolves around having a son, it does make sense that it's like, because the doctor guy makes a good point. He's like, you can either lose both of them or attempt to try to save the baby. And like, well, honestly, I think it's fucked up what happens, but I think he made the right choice. You know, he took a risk.
He took a risk. And I think in his mind, he's just trying to do what's best for the kingdom. Like it's the age beyond that too. Sacrifice. Yes, because in his mind, it's like sacrifice the one person for thousands of lives. In his mind, his wife is doing her duty, right? And this is reflected by the conversation that she has with Ray earlier. So like, I think as messed up as it is, Kate's 100% right that like we have to look at this from that time frame and that perspective. Because I don't think Viserys is a bad guy. I don't.
I think he's definitely a good guy.
Yeah, I think he's a good guy. I think he's trying to be like, I would put myself in this sacrificial position if I had the option to. And I think
also,
right.
Well, if he had told her, "Hey, we're gonna cut open your stomach and take the baby," she would have freaked out.
She would have freaked out. Yeah,
it's better that he came to her calmly by her side. He talked to her, then they restrained her. Like, I mean, it is all still really messed up.
Yeah, it's messed up.
Like, anything, it's like if they knew this was going to happen, he kind of actually, I think, went about the best.
He wouldn't have done it. He wouldn't have gone through with it. He couldn't. It's something else I realized too, and like if Viserys, if having a son was more important than the love of his wife, he would have just had multiple babies with multiple women. You know what I'm saying?
True.
So like,
that is true.
He loves her. He does love her. And I think that's the point, that like, it's not that he's choosing the baby or her. He's choosing the kingdom or her, and he's got to do his duty.
I mean, in a way, she would die either way. Because it's for our listeners, we didn't say this, but they're doing basically a C-section. And it's like they do not have the anesthetics or the surgery equipment to, stop the amount of blood loss that would happen. And there's a lot of blood, as we saw. But the doctor guy, again, I'm sorry, I don't know his name, but he says it's like she's basically going to die either way because the baby is
Yeah.
breached, and she's going to die either way. So it's like die and try to save the baby, or just let them both
Or
die.
just watch them both die. Yeah.
And it goes beyond that, where the reason, because he wants a son, it goes beyond that because the wife and the child die.
Yeah.
And then there's like this turmoil about like who's gonna be the heir. Daemon's like, oh, it's gonna be me. He runs his mouth, and Viserys, out of left field, decides he's gonna name his daughter as his heir.
Well, not out of left field, not out of spite. Because Daemon said at a party, cheers to the king for a day,
but to everybody else,
the son. You know what I mean? Yeah.
Everybody else, it's out of left field, because if we go back to the prologue, back when they actually voted on who was going to be Jaehaerys's heirs, it was 20-1 against his female cousin who had a better claim, but because she was a woman, 20-1 she lost. Right. And so this is all left field that Viserys is going to name his daughter as his heir. Yeah. And then we get to hear about, while he actually has the cat's paw dagger, which we see in Game of Thrones, and he tells her about Aegon the Conqueror's dream about the long winter, the long night, the Night Walkers and the others, and how a Targaryen needs to be there to protect the world. And so that if he really believes that, he sacrificed his wife to save the whole world.
That's the part about that where it's like, it's easy to look at him and be like, he's a bad guy, but he's trying to do his job. And I think that's one of the other things. What's really funny, and we can kind of wrap up after this, but when Daemon hears that Viserys has named Rhae the heir, he loses his shit, and he is like, essentially saying like, I can't believe you've done this. And specifically, he calls Viserys weak. And I thought Viserys' response is so emblematic of the difference that it's like Viserys he may not be physically stronger than Daemon, but he's wiser. He's more mature because Daemon is lashing out like a kid. Right. And so I think it's showing that like it only resolved Viserys' decision even more, because he understood that, Daemon is not ready and will never be ready to be a king. He doesn't have the mentality to lead. And I thought that's why he was then so more comfortable talking to Rhae afterwards with like, I don't know, like more like, I don't want to say like he was encouraged almost when he's telling her like, you got to do this, but I know you can do this, that kind of thing, which is why I'm like, I kind of like Viserys, man. I know he's got some tough decisions, and the expression "heavy is the crown," right? Or "heavy is the head that wears the crown," whatever. So like, I like him. I like him a lot. You know what I mean?
Yeah. So my final thoughts on this first episode: entertaining, very trademark of HBO Game of Thrones, gratuitous violence, misogyny, lots of sex, incest, and the complex politics, everything that you expect from Game of Thrones. Kind of as a way to be like, hey, Game of Thrones fans, this is the same thing, but different. But I mean, it works. It's still, quality writing, good acting, visual effects, and all that. It is hard to get excited because of how much I was burned personally by the end of Game of Thrones, having read the books and all that. But I am hoping for better treatment of this series. George R. R. Martin needs to finish the books already, dude. I am precariously on this bandwagon of House of the Dragon. Prediction wise, I do think Viserys is going to end up a Ned Stark type character. Like, he's a good, wise man, but he doesn't have what it takes to sit on the Iron Throne. And I mean, he keeps getting cut by it, which is kind of an ill omen to anybody who sits on the Iron Throne. That he's not made to do this. I think he's going to be a casualty of this. The kingdom's going to be split. We see a gold Targaryen sigil versus the red Targaryen sigil. Like, we're gonna have civil war. I think Rhae, I give her good chances of coming out on top, but it's gonna cost her a lot, and the Targaryen dynasty is gonna be weakened because of it.
Right. Katé, what about you?
I am also precariously on the bandwagon. Just because for me, watching this episode really just kind of felt like same drama, same political fights and gossip and revenge and sex and violence and making it be as obscene and crazy as possible. it just felt like same of that, just new faces and new names. I mean, I know that that's like the heart of this show. That's this is a prequel to Game of Thrones, so it has to be similar. And we talked about how they had this crazy budget for this new show. I felt like they are really pushing to get all those lost Game of Thrones fans back. So to me, the first episode felt a little extra because I think they're trying to like get all the people. Because I remember when Game of Thrones first came out, people were like, "There's nothing like this show ever before. It's so raw, like everything about it was just so like in your face and visceral and intense, and every episode had a cliffhanger." And I just feel like they're really coming in strong because they want to reel all those fans back in and more. But for me, like I said, it just feels kind of like the same. And it's like we already had a Game of Thrones, and like who's to say this show's not just going to be another letdown in the end? So I'm kind of like, I'm a little wary of this so far.
Yeah, I liked it. I think this was a good start overall. I think when you compare this first episode with the first episode of Game of Thrones, there is a lot of things that I felt are different. And the biggest one being that I felt like the scope of the story is a little bit more narrow this time. Because I felt like one of the downsides to Game of Thrones is that it branched off into so many different storylines, and it just didn't know how to coalesce all of those. I think the most frustrating one was like the Mountain and his brother fighting, and essentially they just jump into some fire. Like, like there's all these like things that they just like, all right, just throw them in the fire, just throw a rock on Cersei, like that kind of stuff. Like there was too many storylines, and I think this is learning from its lesson and just saying like, here is one storyline told very well. It's not going to be told through the eyes of 79 different people. You know what I mean? And I think that's going to be where this show succeeds over Game of Thrones, because it will have a more concrete ending. I think that they are definitely pointing toward the war that doesn't divide the country, but it divides the House of Dragons, right? The Targaryens.
Oh yeah, they say that in the beginning. The only thing that can tear them down is themselves.
Can tear them down is themselves, exactly. And I think my guess, just from what they've shown, I hope I'm right. So if we can come back to this episode like 8 years down the road, I think Rey is going to abdicate the throne. I think that for whatever reason, because they make it seem like she doesn't really want to be in charge. She has no interest in being a queen. And I think this is what leads to the downfall more than the war itself, because that was such a major plot point in the actual Game of Thrones show, right? That like the person who leads has to be able to take the responsibility, but not want the power that comes from it, right? And she wants neither. Yeah, Jon Snow. She's not Jon Snow. I think she's more of an Arya, like Josh said, where she's like, I don't really want anything to do with this. Like, this is not my responsibility. And I think it's going to show us the other side. What happens when the responsibility is put on somebody? I think the show ends with her abdicating to someone she feels is a better ruler, right? That's the ultimate mark of wisdom, knowing when you can't do something. So if I'm right, guys, like...
You know what I wish we all had right now? I wish all three of us had a board of every character's face so far that is from House of Dragons. And we could make our predictions. And
we really need to do that.
Every person that we think is going to die.
NCAA
we could submit it. We could submit that on our Instagram.
That'd be really good. We should do that.
AJ's picks.
There you go.
I'll get started on that one. That's pretty good.
I already am like, every person's face, I was looking into their eyes and I was like, I think you're going to die. You're going to die. You might live. You're probably going to die. Like, because I mean, if this show's going to be like Game of Thrones, everyone you saw in this episode, about maybe like 5% will make it to the last season.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's true. That's true. Well, guys, that's our show. That's that's all we got for today. We will revisit this show at the end of the season. So if you liked our conversation, check out that episode. You guys can find us on every available podcasting platform. So Spotify, Apple, Google, Stitcher. You guys can also follow us on Instagram, Twitter, TikTok. I don't think we're on Facebook because, let's be honest, only our
we
moms use
are on
Facebook.
Facebook. AJ,
No,
AJ.
only our moms use Facebook. Let's be real. Let's keep it real. We're not trying to get our moms to listen. But yes, thank you guys for listening. We appreciate it, and we'll check you guys. We'll hear you guys next week, I guess. I don't know. We'll see what happens. The Bandwagon Fan Podcast is hosted by Josh Jimenez, Alex Magosa, and me, AJ Soy. Our show is produced by Katé Smith and edited by your boy, AJ. Our social media is managed by Natalia Kokulia, and our theme song, Lush Waves, is provided to us by Taylor Lewin of _audio. Thank you for listening, and we'll see you next time.